Thank you for inviting me to speak at the B-School Leadership Conclave. I'm sorry I cannot be there in person. My presentation is going to talk about how India's management education is likely to be redefined by its changes and challenges. I'll focus a little more on leadership and a little less on the curriculum side, and I'll take a framework primarily as to why good institutions fail. While most of my research on why good institutions fail is done on corporations, I find very similar parallels. In fact, when I have talked about that, many presidents of the universities have told me, why don't you write a book about why good institutions fail? So here is my first slide. Why good institutions fail. Good institutions fail when their leaders are either unable or unwilling to adapt when the external environment has changed. Of course, unwilling is very important as unable. There are several styles of management, I find. So I have a chart that describes that. You have the current management style or a culture, and often there is a legacy problem. It wants to stay the same. I call it status quo management. Orthodoxy takes over. We did the business that way. We succeeded very well. Why should we change? This is the inability or unwillingness to change when the environment has changed. For some reason, there is a crisis management. Enrollments are not coming the same way. Cash flow is not there. New competition has come in. And therefore, you begin to say, how do I crisis manage? Crisis management is short term. It can fix the problem in the short run, but not permanently. So ideally, the management style should be what I call anticipatory management. Thinking about the future and working outside in, which means looking at the external context that drives the institution or education in this case, and looking back. Leadership is all about, therefore, bringing 5 changes that are necessary to unlock the institution which is locked in by tradition, by legacy, by success, into the newer one. One is culture, clearly. Other one is its processes, whatever processes are, registration process, curriculum process, semester process, whatever we call it. Systems, third one. Building systems, logistic systems, computer systems, whatever they are. The way you are organized, the structure. And the last one is regulation. Often an institution or the whole industry is unable to change because the regulation is lagging behind the reality. The leadership role is to bring about changes on those 5 constraints that has made the institution captive. I'll pick this one up later on in terms of a more elaborate comment. Good leaders know, therefore, how to convert challenges into opportunities, and this is done again and again. You can see that in the Indian education context. So what are the challenges facing India's education? I've articulated about 7 challenges. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a listed list. The first challenge is policy uncertainty. India's education has been more experimented than any other nation. In the high school curriculum, we had a 12 standard, we went 10 plus 2, PUC in the middle at one time. We are changing constantly. And we are changing constantly, but there's an uncertainty about where the future policy will go. Unfortunately, policy for education is a part of the political process. And in a democratic society, every government that comes in has its own views about where to invest, how to invest, etc. And it creates a huge uncertainty unless there is a political stability and policy articulation. That's one key challenge I find in India. We have the rise of private universities. All of a sudden, there's an excess capacity that is increased now. So in addition to the UGC granted or AICTE certified, now we have this enormous new growth engine of private universities licensed by each state by an act of state assembly, I guess. We need to watch that and its impact on education, management education especially. Digital revolution. We all know digital technology is transforming everything in life, our personal lives, but also our education aspects. So I will articulate about that one. One of the key problems I'm encountering in Indian situation, or I'm told, is dysfunctional boards, especially if you are a society-governed management institution. Globalization of education is here now, whether globalization is in terms of content worldwide coming to the library or to the individual student, and reverse at the same time, students learning, reverse at the same time, students learning global education. It is no longer just limited to American education, American case studies, but today it is all over the world case studies from China, from Japan, from Europe, from England, wherever they are from. We also get a lot of non-traditional competition. In fact, MOOCs as we call them, such as Coursera, edX, and many other varieties of those are still growing enormously. The last one is career-oriented market expectations. The day students join our MBA program or PGPM program, the day they join undergraduate program, they're looking at who will interview on the campus, what will be my career after I graduate, and therefore education is becoming more an occupation as opposed to just learning. So what are the implications for management education? Here are several implications. The first and the key implication is that the future of the MBA program or PGPM is not in general leadership MBA as it was designed, but in specialized degree programs. Second one is my personal passion. I think we need to actually take pride in vocational technical education. All management institutions have the infrastructure in place, location, classes, rhythm, everything. But they have not emphasized the right aspects of what to provide to the students education-wise. Vocational technical is the future of India. It is the vocational technical education that made Germans who they are. It is the vocational technical education that made America who it is. Certifications with a hands-off experiential learning. It is not what or why theory, but how. Know-how, as we used to call. South Korea transforms completely itself in 35 years only from a feudal, backward agrarian society to a complete modern society with a very high income per capita. Third point, faculty immersion abroad. I think we compare ourselves with ourselves. We need to really understand global experiences and global standards. And the way to do it is the role of the institution, both the investors in the institution, the family, the trust, or in private institutions, whoever is owning the one, but also the leaders like the deans and the directors must invest money, ask for budget to set aside for faculty immersion abroad. And you have a faculty delegation that goes out, not individuals, because then they learn from each other and becomes a mutual bond, because we faculty are generally like independent cats. We always say managing faculty is like herding cats, because we allow that autonomy, the freedom to do what we want to do. We are not as much constrained by the processes or by the institutions, so long as we are good citizens to the society and to the institution. This changes the paradigm. Number 4, embrace accreditation. I believe accreditation is a much better approach than regulation, especially in the US and now in Europe. Even though funding comes from ministries of education or from state governments in America for higher education, none of them is driven by their regulations. It's only the funding aspect, but they're driven by accreditation. And of course, we do have business school accreditations. There are 2 or 3 accreditation agencies with ASCSB leading the way. And my view is that accreditation is very beneficial as a process because accreditation is a little more developmental and less compliance. Number 5, think design thinking. Now, what are the 2 key ingredients in design thinking? First of all, it looks at outcome based. It does not look at its input, but what's the output. And working backwards, which I think is a very interesting process. And the other one is a rapid prototyping, which means that if things don't work out the way, we scramble and do it differently. So rapid prototyping and outcome-based design thinking are very key. I'm a strong believer in flipping the classroom. As you know, the normal procedure is that we go to the classroom, do the lecture, students take notes, for example, and then we use outside the classroom, like in a laboratory setting, all of the workshops, the case studies or making gadgets or whatever we do. Especially in India, giving lectures in the classroom is the mode. So this flipping the classroom is going to be more appropriate in the Indian context. And you use classroom for discussion, which makes much greater engagement. Which is why I'm a strong believer in a new paradigm I have created called the 3 I's of learning. In the old days, it was 3 R's of learning: reading, writing, arithmetic, mostly because from agriculture to the industrial society, we wanted to provide literacy. But today we are way beyond literacy, and therefore the 3 I's of learning means how can you have learning interactive as opposed to passive broadcast mode? How can you make learning actually individualized, even a class of 100 students? It's very possible with technology, so that I can have in the discussions, etc., the way it is organized on online platforms, I can individualize to each individual students. It's very possible. And the last one is, how can we make learning integrated? Point number 7, establish research centers. In other words, if you have a center, you have a matrix organization. You have the disciplines of management, but you also have centers where all disciplines of management and other social sciences and behavioral sciences and natural sciences can come if you wanted to. Centers are organized around a societal problem of some sort. Point number 8. I think we need to change the performance appraisal system for faculty and staff, not just faculty. In other words, our current reward system is totally anchored to seniority. How many years an employee has put their time as a professor, instructor, or as a staff person. And of course, seniority wise, we move them up every year by increasing salaries. It has to shift to merit-based performance system. And the last point is point number 10, library goes to the laptop. What does it mean? It means that we will have to invest heavily in digital library sciences. A traditional librarian may not be the right person to lead this initiative. It requires somebody who is very much expert into archiving the data, curation properly, not the traditional books and the journals which were the librarians are taught, but here I talk about clippings of information, or YouTube kind of a content is where we are going pretty much, and lots of text messages. I mean, how do you put all those contents in a very different way? Archiving them, curating them is a very different science. In order to do all these, What we will need is a transformative leadership. What is transformational leadership? My view is that it is all about positioning the institution for the future in a rapidly changing environment or rapidly changing world. This requires, if you remember the previous chart, 5-6 obstacles that come when you do from outside in, like anticipatory management as opposed to status quo management. And the first thing is that transformational leader knows how to change the culture of the institution. If it is teaching centric, how do you make it research centric? If it is discipline centric, how do you make it multidisciplinary centric? Whatever the future that you believe in. Definitely processes, because we have process of registration where students get admitted, graduation, fee collections, student events, whatever the processes we have organized. Structure the way we are organized, the office of the dean or the director, who reports to whom, is it a functional, it's a matrix or even a cubic organization, we don't know. So the structure comes in the way because it is organized for the past success, not necessarily for the future success. Culture change, I find, is much easier than process change. All my research on corporations, including academic institutions, I find that a good leader can change the culture much more rapidly, but the processes are very rigid. Structure change is easier than system change. System is the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, IT infrastructure, whatever infrastructure is. I can bring about a reorganization much faster than bringing about a whole system change. And leading by doing is key to success. My view is that transformational leaders are usually not just great visionaries, but they are great doers. So how do you do this thing is very key, and leading by example, in other words. So let me conclude here. India's educational system is facing several challenges and changes. These include policy changes, technology advances, and growth of private universities. Most good institutions fail because the leaders are either unwilling or unable to adapt with the rapidly changing world or the environment. Transformational leadership means repositioning the institution for the future, thinking about the future constantly, as opposed to the present, which is crisis management, putting out fire every day. Something or the happens on the campus, some student events that come to a light, and you are crisis managing because we have living, breathing people on the campus. Contrary to popular belief, as I mentioned, culture is easier to change than the process. Similarly, restructuring is easier than replacing the system. Managing regulation and public policy is going to become key to future leadership. Thank you very much. Again, I'm sorry I cannot be there in person, and I hope this presentation is useful to you. Thank you again.